Here we have the whirlwind, and Job, covered with boils, sore afflicted, he's got all the problems in the world. His family's dead, his sheep are gone, he's got sores on his body, and his friends think they're better than he is. So that's kind of the icing on the cake. So he's sitting there amidst the dust and the ruins of his life, and a tornado comes up and starts talking to him. So it's going to be a bad day. And what does the tornado say? Tornado says, "Where wert thou when I created the world? Speak if thou hast understanding." That's from the King James Version, if I remember correctly. But the idea is this: I'm Yahweh. I make mountains, I make planets, I make mackerel, I make oceans, I make everything. What do you know how to make? Nothing. All you do is complain. All you do is think you're justified. Yahweh is not pleased. It turns out that the little colloquy between Yahweh and Job suggests that Yahweh doesn't think that he's obligated to explain himself to worms like Job. There's a fine passage in I think it's chapter 25 of Job, where the human beings are compared to maggots and worms in their relationship to Yahweh. And I think the gist of the book of Job is that human beings have a great deal more in common with maggots and worms than they do with the inscrutable divinity. And for the same reason that it would be presumptuous for a worm or a maggot to tell God how to run the universe, since maggots and worms don't know what's going on, it would probably be prudent and faithful and probably be appropriate for us not to make suggestions to Yahweh as to how he might run history. It turns out that if you believe Yahweh is there at all, one of the entailments, one of the concomitants of this idea is that everything happens for a providential reason. And it not only happens to other people, it also happens to you. So the point is then, if you believe in Yahweh, it is necessary to make a moral distinction between good and evil in the world. It is necessary to be able to distinguish between right and wrong, between the faithful adherence to Yahweh's commands and the rejection and alienation from Yahweh's commands. If you make that distinction, A, you must work on the assumption that you are not able to completely fulfill the terms of the covenant. In other words, you must make the assumption of your own sinfulness, of your own depravity in the eyes of Yahweh. This is one way of thinking about original sin. If that is the case, if people are intrinsically depraved, if they are only in fits and starts able to maintain their moral fidelity to the principles of Yahweh, then that means that in every case, for every person, under every circumstance, when bad stuff happens to us, we deserve it. We may not like it, we may not see the direct cause or connection, but there can be no question that Yahweh has his reasons. If you believe that Yahweh is there, and if you believe that his moral order really is universal, then it follows that you are not allowed to have any complaint against Yahweh. He does not want advice. Yahweh's thought it through already. When you are tempted to give him advice, go back and read the book of Job. That is what the book of Job is for. It is to force you into an absolute and radical position of faith, which is a moral virtue unique to the tradition of Western monotheism, or certainly unique in its intensity. The Greeks would find this rather fanatical and rather excessive. But if you view the world as mysterious, if you view Yahweh as inscrutable, and if you view every human being as intrinsically depraved, then all the pieces of the puzzle come together. Then, although we have an incomplete understanding of the world, we have at least a black box, the mystery of Yahweh's providence, in which to throw all our uncertainties. And that means that once we have a way of shrugging off the burden of not understanding Yahweh's plan for the universe, we are also able to throw off the burden of justifying ourselves in God's eyes. It turns out that justifying oneself in God's eyes is superfluous because God already knows our moral status. It turns out that when Satan and God were talking upstairs in heaven or wherever it is that they talk together, well, it turns out that God knew that although Job was going through the motions of being his faithful servant, deep inside, within the soul of Job, there was a certain unreconstructed pride in his status as God's faithful servant. There was a certain idea that he really deserved a house, or not a house because there aren't any then, but that he deserved flocks and a family and the good things in life.